very warm welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. Thousands attend the funeral of senior Hezbollah commander Ibrahim Akil in Beirut. Israel on alert after the Lebanese-based group launched its longest-range rocket attack since the war began. And dozens dead and wounded after an explosion at a coal mine in the east of Iran. First, Hezbollah has been holding a funeral for one of its senior members today in Beirut. That's Ibrahim Akil, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Saturday. He was a wanted terrorist in the United States, where he was linked to the murder of dozens of US Marines in the 1980s. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But first, Hezbollah did fire 100 rockets at northern Israel last night in its longest-range attack since the war began. 4 people were injured and hundreds of thousands fled to the bomb shelters. This was Hezbollah's promised revenge for the maiming and death of dozens of its senior commanders over the past few days. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, has this report.
Within hours, 500,000 Israelis found themselves added to Hezbollah's target list. Over 150 rockets, drones, and cruise missiles were launched at northern Israel on Sunday morning, causing damage to numerous communities, many of which have not been targeted so far. The rockets came from Lebanon, while the drones and cruise missiles were launched from Iraq.
Around 6:30, there was an alarm, and then immediately afterwards, a big explosion, very, very big explosion. Even 3 or 4 houses from here, our window in the main room was completely destroyed.
4 people were lightly wounded from shrapnel. The IDF said it struck dozens of Hezbollah targets across southern Lebanon, including rocket launchers and military structures.
This is war, okay? Not present for anybody, I believe in this. But I tell you what, I don't fear about myself. I feel only about our children, our little children, because they didn't do nothing to anybody, you know. Children are innocent.
Hezbollah's launches were their deepest rocket fire into Israel since they unilaterally began attacking Israel on October 8th, forcing nearly 100,000 Israelis to evacuate. As a result of the expanded range, the IDF's Home Front Command tightened its restrictions in northern Israel. Schools were ordered shut in the Golan Heights, Galilee, and Haifa Bay area, as hospitals in the north were instructed to move patients to protected areas.
We are determined to return our residents in the north safely to their homes. No country can tolerate fire on its residents, fire on its cities, and we, the State of Israel, will not tolerate it either. We will do everything necessary to restore security.
Hezbollah said the escalation was its response to last week's pager and walkie-talkie blasts, as well as the targeted elimination of Hezbollah's top commander, Ibrahim Akil, and over a dozen other senior Radwan force commanders, and said that this was only the beginning.
We have entered a new phase. We call it the Battle of Open Reckoning. This includes the support front for Gaza. From time to time we kill them, and we will continue to fight them in ways which they are aware of, and in ways which they are not aware of.
Speaking to Sky News, Israeli President Isaac Herzog said Israel does not want to wage a war with Hezbollah, but that it has the obligation to protect its people.
And all of these leaders who were eradicated on Friday by the Israeli attack, all of these leaders were meeting together in order to launch the same horrific, horrendous attack that we had on October 7th by Hamas, by burning Israelis, butchering them, raping their women, abducting and taking hostage old people and young and little babies. This is exactly the same plan that they've been planning for years.
And so, with Israel delivering Hezbollah blow after blow, and the Iranian proxy deepening its range of fire into Israel, the sides are approaching the point of no return.
And as you heard there, Israel's northern city of Haifa came under sustained attack last night. There was a direct hit on the suburb of Kiryat Bialik. Well, our Robert Swift is up in Haifa for us now. Rob, the biggest attack on Israel's northern city since the war began, wasn't it?
That's right, it was indeed. Now, the most recent attacks, the last three actually, that have taken place over about the last 3 hours, they've all been in the far eastern, northeastern end of Israeli territory, in communities around Kiryat Shmona, where there's been drone infiltrations as well as rocket attacks. But it was in this area, in the far west of Israeli territory, those large-scale bombardments took place this morning, causing a number of casualties, as well as one death due to a car crash during one of the air raid sirens. And it's in response to them that the IDF has stepped up the preparations for an escalation with Hezbollah, as well as the Home Front Command establishing various different means of protecting communities, not least of which is the preparations being conducted by Rambam Hospital as we speak, as well as the two other major hospitals in the north of Israel, where the operations of those hospitals have been moved underground to pre-prepared positions for the patients to be able to continue their care whilst remaining in a relatively safe location. And it's due to the fear that the large-scale bombardments that we saw last night, that they won't be the only ones, that the Israeli-Lebanese border, which you can see in the distance behind me, that additional fire may come from there, that these steps have been taken.
Yeah, we're certainly witnessing an escalation, aren't we, Rob? I think that's for sure. But we're hearing that rocket sirens are still going off, Metula, in the last few minutes and elsewhere as well. Just give us a sense, how are people preparing where you are in the north? How are they preparing for this very significant escalation with Hezbollah?
Look, at the minute here in Haifa, it is quite a mixed picture. On the one hand, you've got the hospital close to our location, where serious efforts are being made. There's soldiers and hospital staff basically carrying and wheeling patients from the hospital down into the car park so that they can continue their care there safely. On the other hand, you've also got people out in the streets of Haifa who seem to be pretty relaxed about the events. There's couples out strolling along the beach. So it's not clear if these people are just being a little bit naive as towards the situation, or if this represents the opinion among the Israeli public that, as the IDF and Israeli government officials have said, they have dealt Hezbollah a serious blow, and perhaps our organisation won't be able to respond in the manner in which it would wish to do so, because for in all the recent bouts of combat between Hezbollah and the IDF, the Israeli forces do seem to have come out on top, demonstrating superior intelligence and technological capability. And that may be what we're seeing in some of the public, that they feel confident in that.
Rob, thank you very much. Robert Swift up there in Haifa, braced for another night of possible action. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital is a former commander in the Special Forces of the IDF. Good evening to you, Doron. We're also joined by Rowan Osman. She's a Syrian-Lebanese peace activist with us in Israel tonight. Good evening. Great to see you again, Rowan, as well. Doron, I'll start with you. The message from the Israeli government is if Hezbollah doesn't move north of the Litani River, and if the world doesn't enforce that, Israel will force Hezbollah to move north. Yes, is that message getting through, do you think?
Well, we did get through, that's the question. But the message is very clear that we are not going to now start a ground troop maneuvering in the southern tip of Lebanon unless we are forced to. But that our objective is a very limited objective when you take all things into account. Not the dismantling of Hezbollah, not the taking over of Lebanon, not a regime change in Lebanon.
Not even the disarming of Hezbollah, right?
No, in this context, no. The context is to create this buffer zone. It doesn't mean the presence of the IDF there, but a buffer zone according to the 1701, according the line of the Litani River, in which troops of Hezbollah cannot be there, and if they'll be there, we'll have to attack them by fire. So this is the context. Whether we can achieve it diplomatically or not, this is yet to be seen.
OK. Rowan, what is your sense of how people are feeling inside Lebanon? Do you think that there's a fear that Israel appears to be no longer holding itself back?
People are terrified, and they are accusing Israel of having the intention of occupying the south, which is not the case. Lebanon is not Gaza. There is a Lebanese government, there is a Lebanese army. It's not up to Israel to disarm Hezbollah, it's up to them to make a decision now that they see that the Lebanese are or will bear the consequences of Hezbollah's recklessness. It is up to them. They are scared, of course, of a serious escalation, but I must say, in Gaza, people are accusing the Israelis of carpet bombing, of indiscriminately targeting civilians. This was not the case in Lebanon. It was clear like the sun. It was a genius, precise attack.
You're talking about the pagers and the walkie-talkie attacks that have been blamed on Israel?
I think Israel did the maximum it can to target precisely those involved in terrorism, members of Hezbollah. I heard the news of 2 children who died, and every civilian casualty is one too many. But what can you do after nearly a year of Hezbollah provoking Israel? The Lebanese understand that Israel was going to retaliate sooner or later.
Do you think that Hezbollah would be surprised by the amount of sympathy they've received in the international media to that?
I was watching President Macron, and he speaks about a tragedy. Yes, for me, this little girl who died, 8-year-old girl,
he spoke
is a
directly
tragedy.
to the Lebanese people.
But he's speaking to the Lebanese people about the hard time we're going through. France, in particular, opted for a diplomatic solution, and I was surprised because what did they achieve so far? Nothing. Nobody can force Hezbollah to change their ways, except Israel. And we must admit that Hezbollah was humiliated like never before last week. Now, I was surprised as someone who has family in Lebanon. Nobody in my family, as far as I know, sympathizes with Hezbollah. My family in Syria definitely doesn't sympathize with Hezbollah. They have a lot of Syrian blood on their hands. So to see people, especially in the UN, talking about the tragedy, instead of commanding, instead of commanding this precise attack, is confusing, to say the least.
Absolutely. Doron, we're hearing more details about the purpose of that meeting in Dahir that was targeted on Saturday by an Israeli airstrike, took out some of the senior Hezbollah commandos. According to Israel's president and others, the Radwan forces, the elite forces in Hezbollah, were planning an October the 7th style massacre on the north of Israel.
So this is what the intelligence says. Clearly they were plotting something. Whether it's something in the scope of 7th of October, I think it would be hard for them to execute it, given the fact that there's no surprise element here, that we are ready, we are on the border, and we are prepared. We are so prepared that we succeeded to really attack them in this precise attack. This is an indication of a very good intelligence, a very good technology, because to penetrate, they were like in a sort of a basement. This is and to limit it, as was said here, to be very precise in the attack, to limit the collateral damage. This is a great military success. And hitting a guy that, because I was in the 80s in Beirut, and I do remember the terrible, the 240 Marine soldiers that got killed. In 1983. Yeah, 83. And this is the guy that was associated with this event. So this is clearly a very successful attack. And I think the U.S. is also joining the respect to this success.
Well, you say that, but I mean, how conscious do you think that the Israelis are of the US policy, which has been all along, do not escalate, don't do anything to provoke a wider regional war? Do you think the US is still on side with that?
Yeah, I think also I say to my Israeli friends, we play here a game which is a coalition game. We have to admit it. And we need the US, we needed them when we had to intercept the Iranian attack on the 13th of April against the Houthis. They help us, of course. We are part of this coalition. Of course, they don't want a full-blown war. We don't want a full-blown war in the north also. Iran even doesn't want a full-blown war. But we have to bring our citizens back. We have this 1701 criteria or standard by which we can bring our citizens back, and we need to enforce it in some way or another. Clearly, the Lebanese army, as was mentioned here, is not strong enough to do it. Maybe some international intervention would be needed. Who knows? It was in the past, done in the 80s. But as the president said, the Israeli president, I think Bibi Netanyahu, our war is not with the Lebanese people and not with the Lebanese government. And Israel, until now, keeps a very clear distinction between the Hezbollah as a terror organization and the Lebanese infrastructure, Lebanese state, and I think in the meantime it's the right move to do.
Okay, thank you both for now. Well, meanwhile, in Beirut today, there was a lavish funeral ceremony for Ibrahim Akil, the senior Hezbollah commander who was killed in the strike on a building in the Dakhia neighbourhood of Beirut on Saturday. Akil was a Hezbollah leader wanted by the US for his role in a string of bombings in the 1980s, including the US Marine Corps barracks bombing in 1983, which killed 241 US military personnel. Well, for more on that, we're joined by David Daoud. He's a senior fellow on Israel, Hezbollah and Lebanon at the FDD, the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Thank you very much for being with us, David. So Ibrahim Akil, he reportedly took over from Fouad Shakir, who was assassinated earlier this year. We've seen some 20, I think, Radwan commanders wiped out over the weekend. Is this taking a toll on the organisation and its ability to operate right now?
Thank you, as usual, for having me on. Doubtlessly, I mean, when you're taking out not just senior military commanders, but veterans, you're taking out a collection of relationships, you're taking out decades of expertise. Of course, this is going to put Hezbollah on its heels, especially when the Israelis did this in an unexpected time and an unexpected manner. Akil was killed apparently in a meeting in an underground parking lot, right? Who would have imagined that the Israelis would have done this? But, you know, and wiped out most of, if not all of the Radwan forces command. Yes. Will there be replacements? Do they have deputies? Doubtlessly. This doesn't mean Hezbollah is going to collapse immediately. But again, you're taking out veterancy and expertise that has been accumulated over decades, perhaps. Well,
Israel keeps saying that it's trying to get the message through to Hezbollah that if it doesn't retreat north of the Litani River, as it is supposed to do under UN Resolution 1701, it will have no choice but to force it to do so. From what you know about Hezbollah, is there any scenario where you can see Nasrallah deciding that it is worth his while doing that rather than continuing to rack up these losses?
Well, I think Hezbollah has backed themselves into a corner. From the outset of this conflict, they said they're going to continue attacking Israel, as you know, until a prior Gaza ceasefire is achieved. Now, in Nasrallah's last speech, he actually added the cessation of Israeli operations in the West Bank to that as well. Backing down from that would make Hezbollah look weak, which is something Hezbollah can't afford to do. We need to understand that the source of Hezbollah's popular support, and they do have a lot of it, anyone who tells you otherwise is misleading you, is not premised on some kind of ideological linkage or genuine sense of belief, you know, in Wilayat al-Faqih. It's on this idea that Hezbollah is a strong resistance organization that is capable of deterring Israel and deterring sales of defeating it. For Hezbollah to back down, to be forced into terms by Israel, would puncture that image, would reveal weakness, and perhaps compromise the basis of Hezbollah's popular support.
David, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. David Daoud there at the FDD. Well, the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, has just begun speaking about the situation in the north. Let's take a listen.
Thank you.
Has showed and raised its alert and its readiness. Last Friday, we hit the elite Hezbollah forces, the Radwan. Its most senior commander, Ibrahim Akil, was eradicated. It's very important, and I know to what degree this shakes the organization. These commanders and terrorists organized for years to conquer the Galilee. Their responsibility for the murder of Israeli civilians and soldiers over the years. They planned how to plan the next massacre, the next terror attack. On Friday afternoon, how they can penetrate Israel, murder civilians, abduct Israeli soldiers. We preempted that through first-class maneuvers, not only of the intelligence, but of the soldiers themselves. The entire chain of command of the Hezbollah received a very clear message. And this has a message that we will be able to hit anyone who hits the citizens of the State of Israel, wherever they may be. We, the very first command of the Hezbollah, we are attacking and destroying all their capabilities in various ways with ploys and tricks. We are acting endlessly. At the beginning of the war, we hit at them methodically, day after day. For months, we are diminishing their capabilities, detracting from them, stressing their launching capabilities and their ability to fight. We are distancing them to the borderline, which is threatening the citizens of the State of Israel, those who live alongside the border. They want to be able to live there peacefully. We have hit out at 600 terrorists, some of them the top command of the Hezbollah. The price that the Hezbollah is paying is increasing. And as long as we continue attacking, they will be losing more and more of their forces. This morning, once again, they hit out with a tremendous barrage against the citizens of Israel. No sovereign country can allow such a threat on its citizens and sovereignty. Hezbollah is locating its launch pads very close to Lebanese civilians and thus risking them, endangering them. We will do everything necessary to remove these threats against the State of Israel. We will return our displaced citizens to their homes in the north. And the Hezbollah will be hit at again and again until they get the message and are eradicated. We have the capabilities, we have not used them all as yet. And we will continue doing so on the offensive and on our defense as well. We are planning them in a top quality way for the next few days. I would like to speak to the residents of the north, and I know that you are not in your own homes. I want you to know that the IDF is 24/7 doing everything so that we can return you with a sense of security to your homes, so that your families and your children will feel secure. We are doing so hand in hand with the authorities, the heads of the local authorities, and I must say, in these complex times, they have shown such resilience and truly should be appreciated for what they are doing. You have to continue behaving with accountability and responsibility, as you have done up to now. There were barrages that hit the north of the country from early morning. The assaults were great, but the damage was less. We will ensure that you can be as safe as possible. Our enemy will try to challenge us as we go along too. It's not simple. But if you adhere properly to all the directives, it is a tremendous effort, but if we all do it together, we will prevail. The IDF has fought resiliently in the north and in the south, and in Judea and Samaria, and against, of course, Yemen, Iraq, and of course, Iran. It's all backed by them. We will fulfill all the objectives of the war. We're talking about Hamas and all its activists, all the terrorists in the Gaza. We will bring the hostages home. It's incumbent upon us that even when we're fighting in the north, we continue fulfilling that aim. It is so important to all of us. And we will bring the residents of the north back to their homes. I wish to say that we salute those who are paying such a heavy price in these days, the parents and families and all those close to those who have fallen, those who are wounded. But we will honor them through the perpetuation, our determination to fulfill all these aims and goals. The regular and so many of our reserve forces, they are standing steadfast, even at this very moment. They are fighting on all the arenas. All the commanders and combat soldiers are fighting to return security and that sense of security.
That was the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, speaking directly to the nation, and in particular Doron Avital, speaking directly to the residents of the north who have had to be out of their homes for nearly a year now.
A clear message, repeating what we already know, but it's important that the head of the army stands and says to the resident, the objective is to bring you back to your homes, but those are the conditions that we have to generate in the battlefield, repeating, going back over the successes, the hitting of really the top leadership of Radwan forces, which is this commando forces of Hezbollah, outlining the objective of the war again, that never mind the fact that we are fighting the north now, we still have to dismantle Hamas, and we still have this sacred this important mission of bringing the hostages. I think a very important statement in a crucial time, and it's good that the public would hear him.
And he seemed to be suggesting that Israel has more tricks up its sleeve.
Yeah, he says it all the time. He said we have a lot of capacities that we don't execute yet, and I think a few times ago he said, listen up, whenever we execute a capacity, watch out, we have 2 stages ahead that we might use them. So it's really, I think this is important also for the Israeli public to understand that to create a success in military affairs, it's not something that you just push a button. You really have to generate the capacity. You have to have the window of opportunity in order to execute it. And it requires this kind of patience and this kind of building up the forces stage by stage to achieve the goal in the end.
Israel has been criticised for being, by some anyway, for being too defensive up to this point with Hezbollah. Do you think now it has switched to the offensive?
First of all, I think he was saying, I'm not sure, I don't take this stand. I think we had really a major battlefield in the south, and we had to really concentrate there. And in the meantime, we were wearing down Hezbollah. I mean, like he was talking about 600 of Hezbollah operative dead, about tens of leadership from the top leadership, and those two the successes of the last few days and weeks. So I think we have to have, as a public, to understand that we are in a war, and in a war there are stages, and you have to decide when to do what, and this is the way we have to follow it up forward.
Okay, Doron, thank you. Well, there were celebrations when it emerged that one of the victims of the pager attacks was a certain Hussein Ali Gandour, not from Israelis, but from Syrians. Why? Well, Gandour was known for masterminding a brutal siege on Syrian civilians back in 2016. Our Alexander Schloss has this report.
Hussein Ali Gandour, known by some as the Butcher of Madaya, was killed in a series of pager explosions in Lebanon, an attack attributed to, but not acknowledged by Israeli intelligence services. Gandour earned his moniker during the Syrian civil war, when Hezbollah intervened on behalf of the Syrian government. Hezbollah, along with the Syrian army, laid siege to the city of Madaya amid a push to re-establish control of the Assad regime over the Syrian-Lebanese border region. Dozens died of starvation during the year-long siege, and then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon decried the situation in Madaya, warning against the use of starvation as a weapon of war.
Well, the situation in Madaya and other besieged areas are absolutely horrific. Like you see the photos of kids and mothers and adults who are absolutely like starving to death. They are like on the edge of death because of because of the lack of food and medications. Spoke to a father of 5 kids in Madaya, and he said, like, we don't have any food. And they said, look, I heard you are eating grass. He said, yes, that was in the past, a few days ago. We don't have a grass anymore because of the snow, the grass gone. And I said, like, what are you eating? He said, literally, we boil water and we add some black peppers, salt, and some spices to make a meal for our kids. We don't have anything.
In April 2017, an Iran-Qatar brokered ceasefire was reached, and 10,000 people of the estimated 40,000 total population of the wider area were evacuated. Ghandour joins the ranks of other senior Hezbollah operatives who honed their battlefield tactics in Syria and earned their place in the group's elite Radwan forces.
All right, well, Rawan Osman, of course, you are part Syrian. Part of your family is from Syria. And people tend to forget, don't they, that Hezbollah is not only responsible for the deaths of Israelis and Americans and French, they also fought side by side with the regime forces in Syria to murder Syrian Arabs as well.
The Secretary General of Hezbollah denied at the beginning any involvement in the war in Syria. But eventually, when some of his fighters, militants, were dying in uniform, they had their IDs on them, their secret came out, and he bragged about supporting the regime in Syria. And we know that there are at least 500,000 documented deaths. These are Syrians that were killed by al-Assad regime. Not all of them were ISIS members. And Hezbollah is very, very closely involved in killing Syrian civilians. They saved al-Assad's regime together with the Iranians and the Russians. The Syrians will never forgive them. Do you know who else they starved to death? Palestinians in the Yarmouk camp. The Palestinians also tend to forget that the Syrian champion of the Palestinian cause, starved Palestinian children to death. And now you just reminded me of the atrocities in Madaya. It is very hard for any Syrian to sympathize with Hezbollah. We could not care less, and this was a day of celebration. Last week, many of us felt gratitude for what Israel has done because the world let the Syrian people down, and we are still paying the price. But it's about time that Hezbollah pays the price as well for what they've done to the Lebanese, to the Syrians, and not only to the Israelis. They celebrate death also in Gaza to the point that they want to bring the fate of Gaza upon the Lebanese people. I would rather see them targeted precisely instead of seeing the Lebanese infrastructure destroyed, because unlike Gaza, in Lebanon, I dare say half the people are sick of Hezbollah.
You would say half the country has had enough of Hezbollah, but they don't have the means, of course.
I say this with confidence, and I know that many fractions, not only Christians, also Shiites, they are arming and training their men in the last years. They are ready, if the right time comes, to help rid the country of Hezbollah. But for that, we need the help of the Lebanese army. And this is not sufficient. We need the Americans to support, or the international community, instead of feeling sorry for Hezbollah.
All right, Rawan Osman, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, Israel was also under attack from Iraq last night when 2 cruise missiles and 2 drones were fired at the Golan Heights and intercepted outside of Israeli airspace. Iran-backed militias claimed responsibility, and they have been joining in on attacks on Israel as part of Iran's so-called axis of resistance. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Entifad Kambar. He's the president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee and a former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Thank you very much for being with us, Entifad. Who are these groups, and are they becoming more powerful in Iran?
Well, it's good to be with you, Laura. I tell you one thing, these are terrorist Iranian proxy militias, but it was very sad and dangerous. They are on the Iraqi government payroll under what's called Hashd al-Sha'bi, the PMF. And they are using Iraqi government IDs, Iraqi government vehicles to attack Israel. Now, I just want to say something and squeeze a bigger subject with few words. in this short interview, that if you look at the thing from a holistic approach, what's happening now, I don't have any doubt that Israel can handle the tactical part and the war part. They can diminish their enemies. And we saw that in Gaza. We saw that how 600 top Hezbollah operatives has been killed and more is coming. But what's happening now, we have a UN which is supporting tyranny against peace-loving countries. We have a broken UN. I saw an interview for Guterres this morning with Fareed Zakaria on CNN, and he was sad because the pages were exploded on Hezbollah operatives. I think what they're trying to do, and we know that Guterres is a PLO veteran sympathizer, what they're trying to do is to establish a new regional and world order in which terrorists can start a war anytime, and they can call for ceasefire anytime, and they have their food troops in American universities, in the streets of Paris, in the streets of Berlin, calling for ceasefire. And that is a very, very dangerous precedent to be established. I think what's more troubling, the United States' weak stance. We see that again with the Kurds. The Kurdish government is the #1 ally, the only ally for the United States. However, every aggression practiced by Baghdad on Kurdistan, cutting off oil export, cutting off salaries, the pressure, the United States practiced pressure on the Kurdish government rather than practicing pressure on the Baghdad government. So what we have now, a Western and United States world putting pressure on Israel and their allies and treating their enemies much better than their allies. And I think that is what is most troubling in the whole thing.
So, I mean, the Iranian foreign minister, I believe he's already in the United States enjoying taxpayer-funded protection ahead of the UN General Assembly next week. I mean, what are you expecting to hear then at that gathering?
Well, I should tell you, I mean, one shocking thing, you have Arakchi, who is an IRGC terrorist, arrives in New York with the U.S. protection personnel. This guy, instead of being protected by U.S. personnel, should be arrested. We have the Iraqi prime minister. I mean, I sympathize with him. He is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Iraqi forces, and those militias technically under his command. And they go and bomb Israel and bomb other countries. So what's happening now, there's a regional attack on Israel by the Houthis, by the Iraqi militias. But when Israel wants to reply or respond appropriately on a regional basis, Israel will be accused of spreading regional war. This is really a dangerous thing. We saw that in 1939 when the West threw a bone to Hitler and allowed him to occupy Poland. And look what happened next. 6 million Jews were killed, and tens of millions are killed in a Second World War. This may lead us to a Third World War. I'm very afraid of that. If we set the rules of engagement and allow Khamenei to set these rules.
Well, do you think there is a risk, Entifad, that Israel will be left to fight this war alone? Because just talking about Iraq, for example, the US still has a couple of thousand of troops there, but there are already negotiations underway to withdraw those troops. Do you think this is just the way we are progressing? The United States is no longer interested in having a presence in the Middle East?
Well, it's a bureaucratic, opportunistic policy. All I can say, hoping that the bad guy, by allowing them to do what they want, to stop attacking. That's how the United States, unfortunately, lift the sanctions from the Houthis February 2020, and also lift the sanctions or allowed Iran to make hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, this is a very dangerous precedent unless I think the responsibility falls on the world, not only in Israel, to stop this mayhem and stop this new dangerous rule of engagement. We cannot punish United States allies, peace-loving nations, at the expense of awarding terrorists like Iran and the Houthis and the Iraqi militias. The United States should hold the Iraqi government accountable and responsible for launching these attacks. And Mr. Soudani, the Prime Minister of Iraq, is here in New York. They must face him with this, and they must put very strong and strict measures on how the relation between the United States and Iraq will go. And Iraq cannot be considered. Now we have two countries supporting terrorism openly, funding terrorism in the region. Not only Iran, Iraq is as well. And Iraq is funding Hezbollah, funding Iran nefarious activities, and funding directly these militias which are attacking Kurdistan, attacking Saudi Arabia, attacking United Arab Emirates, and attacking Israel.
Etifat, thank you very much indeed. Etifat Kambar there. Well, Israeli forces raided the offices of the Qatari-owned news network Al Jazeera in Ramallah overnight. It comes weeks after Israel shut down the channel's Jerusalem bureau, citing a threat to national security. Our Emma Siegel has this report.
In the early hours of Sunday morning, the IDF raided news network Al Jazeera in the West Bank city of Ramallah on live TV. The bureau is ordered closed for 45 days. Al Jazeera has denounced the move.
This is a blatant attack on the Al Jazeera channel and Al Jazeera network and those who are working with them, as well as on the freedom of speech and the task of delivering the truth. This is an attack that aims to obscure the truth.
The Qatar-funded broadcaster has increasingly come under Israel's scrutiny for its coverage amid the Israel-Hamas war, as well as the alleged links between Al Jazeera members and terror organizations operating in the Gaza Strip. The latest shuttering of Al Jazeera's office follows an order issued in May that saw Israeli police raid its East Jerusalem and Nazareth bureaus, seizing equipment, stopping its broadcasts, and blocking its websites in Israel.
Stop working, and nobody can go inside the office. This is a situation. It's mean that they extended the closure, the closure of our office, the shutdown of our office in Jerusalem, and banning our working inside Israel to the West Bank. They extended to the West Bank now, which means that Al Jazeera cannot work inside Israel and inside the West Bank.
Israeli Minister of Communications Shlomo Kari confirmed the raid, calling Al Jazeera, quote, the mouthpiece of Hamas and Hezbollah, saying Israel will continue to fight the enemy channels. In April, Israel's government passed an emergency law allowing the country to ban Al Jazeera for a 45-day period with further 45-day renewals subject to court approval. The ban has now been renewed 4 times since then. As the broadcaster continues to operate from neighboring Jordan, it is unclear how long it will be banned from broadcasting within Israel or the West Bank.
And Doron Avital and Rowan Osman still with me. Do you think this was the right decision for Israel to close the offices of Al Jazeera?
Absolutely. It was about time. I'm surprised why Al Jazeera staff is surprised. They are well aware of their role. They are an agent in every war in the region. And me personally, I have the privilege of being able to watch their broadcasting in English and in Arabic. And they speak different languages, also politically. They are indeed the mouthpiece of Hamas and Hezbollah, and they twist and spread misinformation. They twist what happens on the ground, and they're inciting continuously. So if you are an enemy of Israel, why are you surprised when they ban you? And they are not contributing in any positive outcome. They also want the annihilation of the occupying force. They can't even call it Israel. At least not on the Arabic channels.
You're right,
exactly.
And it is interesting to note that it's a channel that's banned in many countries in the Middle East. It's also banned in India because of incitement there. But is there a risk, Doron, that this might annoy Qatar a bit too much?
I think the question in place is Qatar, because we need Qatar as a moderator in the context of the hostages. You don't choose your moderators or your negotiators in the context of a hostage deal. So I think we have to be smart, to be pragmatical, to be careful. This is a location in the West Bank, so it's tricky. This is Ramallah. It's not because within Israel they are banned. So we have to be pragmatical, I would say.
They still have Al-Arabi. So Al-Arabi is reporting from Israel and from the West Bank. And that's also a Qatari channel. Yeah. So this is a good compromise. I think it's about time Al Jazeera was hit on the wrist because they overdid it.
What about the argument, though, you know, Israel is the only free country in the region, it's the only country with a free press, it's the only country with a free media. Do you think it's harmful to Israel's
It's not wise to commit suicide, Laura. It's not wise. There must be some sort of limitation. Israel is a democracy, but there is a limit for free speech, even in the West. So when this is harming Israeli civilians, the image of Israel all around the globe, and it's a massive, massive channel with a colossal budget, it was about time it was warned. And it's not suspended forever.
No, it's for a limited time, sure.
Okay. Well, so they have to adjust their strategy.
The other example is, of course, the British and the French banned Russian state-owned media once Russia had invaded Ukraine and before. Yeah. So
why?
As if it's a first. Exactly, because they were spreading
misinformation.
So it's an interesting topic. All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Rawan and Doron. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, the United Nations has filed a document in a US court arguing that UNRWA employees who took part in the October 7th massacre should be immune from prosecution. According to Israeli media, the filing also has the support of the US Department of Justice. Israel has provided evidence that UNRWA workers committed such atrocities as murder, hostage-taking, and even kidnapping the bodies of the dead and wounded. Well, with us now, Hillel Neuer is the Executive Director of UN Watch, United Nations Watch. Great to have you with us, Hillel. And I mean, Hillel, as you well know, UNRWA workers are credibly accused of taking part in crimes against humanity. How strong is the UN's argument that they deserve immunity?
Look, on September, I have the date here, on September 26th, UNRWA announced that they had terminated the contracts of a dozen employees were accused of being involved in the massacre, and they promised that they would hold them accountable, including, quote, through criminal prosecution. So UNRWA promised that those who were involved in the massacre would be held accountable, including through criminal prosecution. Now, the current proceeding, the legal proceeding that's been referred to in the immunity argument that's been made, to my understanding, it's not specifically about those who took part in the massacre. Rather, it's a lawsuit that sues UNRWA and its senior officials like Lazzarini and his predecessor for being complicit, for enabling Hamas to do all that it has done in the past 10 years to build up the terrorist infrastructure, to put terror tunnels underneath UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza, and that they knew or reasonably should have known, should have reasonably foreseen what they would have done. So to my understanding, the lawsuit that's being referred to is a lawsuit that does not target the individuals who took part in the massacre, but rather the leaders of UNRWA and UNRWA itself. And it's to that lawsuit that UNRWA has invoked immunity. To my knowledge, there has been yet no criminal prosecution of the individuals involved. And indeed, UNRWA themselves promised they would hold them accountable through criminal prosecution. So our question is, you know, now that UNRWA they initially fired a dozen, then they again fired 9 of those dozen when the OIOS division of the UN Oversight Investigations Division confirmed that there was compelling evidence against at least 9, and about 9 others, there was some evidence. UNRWA hasn't done anything to present these individuals for prosecution. And what we'd like to see from UNRWA is present them. Will they present them to Israel, these individuals? Will they hand them over? Will they hand them over to the United States? The United States does have criminal charges against 6 or 7 Hamas leaders. I think UNRWA has to answer that question.
Well, what about the US Department of Justice then? Why is it supporting UNRWA's defense?
Well, there is a legal, technical aspect here that has to be acknowledged, which that, like it or not, the United Nations enjoys immunity from legal proceedings. This is going back to the UN Charter from 1945. The UN agencies and officials who are performing their functions do have immunity. And so the US State Department is sort of fulfilling their technical role of passing on the UN's claim of immunity in this particular lawsuit. And you could say that the State Department is doing a technical function of what they would do kind of in all cases. But there is something odd, of course, in that the U.S. Department of Justice just about 10 days ago, about 2 weeks ago, announced criminal charges against 6 or 7 Hamas leaders. One of them is Ali Baraka in Lebanon. He's one of the Hamas leaders of Lebanon, and he's named by the Department of Justice for engaging in these crimes against humanity. One of his close colleagues is Fathi al-Sharif, who is the head of the UNRWA Teachers Union. He's principal of the UNRWA Deir Yassin school outside of Sidon, I think, in Lebanon. And he's head of the UNRWA Teachers Union, Fathi al-Sharif, and appears from all indications to be heavily involved in supporting Hamas terrorism and to be a Hamas official. So should the U.S. government be, on the one hand, dropping criminal charges against Hamas leaders who are very close with UNRWA Teachers Union leaders, and at the same time invoking immunity, certainly there seems to be a disconnect. And again, UNRWA should take the lead and saying anyone involved in terrorism, certainly anyone directly involved in terrorism, should enjoy no immunity, that UNRWA will not invoke immunity and let them be prosecuted in a court of law. And if they're found not guilty, fine. But if they're found guilty, UNRWA shouldn't step in and shield these accused terrorists. And
despite these stunning allegations and the extensive proof that there is, several countries who suspended their funding to UNRWA, most of them have now restored it. The US says it is also going to restore funding to UNRWA. Do you think the organisation is just going to continue as it has done in the past, or will it ever face justice for its participation in October 7th?
Look, many of the foreign ministries around the world are gaslighting us. There is clear and compelling and voluminous evidence that UNRWA staff, UNRWA teachers have for well over a decade been actively promoting terrorism, glorifying Adolf Hitler, inciting their students and other Palestinians to commit terrorism, and that UNRWA leaders are involved in terrorism. Again, I mentioned Fathi al-Sharif, head of the UNRWA Teachers Union. According to Lebanese media, he's a Hamas terrorist official. Su'ail al-Hindi, leader of the UNRWA Teachers Union in Gaza up until a few years ago, elected member of the Hamas Politburo with Yahya Sinwar, a major figure in the massacre of October 7th. UNRWA is paying his pension. UNRWA never fired him, even when they knew the evidence. They gave him a slap on the wrist of suspension for just a couple of months. So UNRWA is sending the wrong message. And sadly, the foreign ministries know all of this. We've published this. We've sent it to them. I've testified in Congress 4 times, European Parliament, Dutch Parliament, Swiss Parliament. All the foreign ministries know it. They say that UNRWA is promised to remedy its policies, to change, to reform. It's a complete lie. The fact, for example, that they won't fire Fathi al-Sharif, head of their UNRWA Teachers Union in Lebanon, is proof positive that UNRWA has not reformed at all. And the State Department announced that they want to restore funding. Of course, there's a law that prevents them from doing so until March 2025. Let's recall that just 2 weeks ago, the Swiss Parliament, lower house, voted 99 to 88 to, and I quote, immediately suspend funding for UNRWA. That's an incredible sign. We'd like to see other governments adopt that kind of moral policy. For example, the Dutch is headed by a coalition, Geert Wilders, who says he's against UNRWA. We'd like to see the Netherlands cut all financing for an agency deeply invested in promoting terrorism.
All right, we'll have to wait and see over the next few months, won't we? But Hillel Neuer at UN Watch, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dozens of people have been killed and more are missing after an explosion at a coal mine in the east of Iran. More than 20 people were injured in the blast at the mine in the South Khorasan province. More in this report.
Another race against time for Iran as it tries to save workers trapped inside a coal mine following an explosion. According to state media, the explosion killed at least 51, but local authorities claim there were 69 people in the mine at the time of the blast. The blast occurred in the South Khorasan province in the eastern part of the country around 9 p.m. local time, reportedly caused by a methane gas explosion. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian shared his condolences for the victims.
I expressed my condolences to the families of these loved ones. I spoke with the ministers of health, country and industry. We are following this issue with all our efforts. The conversation I had with the Minister of Industry is that this incident should be a lesson that from now on, in the minds of our country, there should be a system that this kind of accident would not happen. I imagine we can prevent this.
The Tabas mine is considered the richest and largest coal area in Iran, covering over 30,000 square kilometers, according to state media, and provides for 76% of the country's coal. With an incident like this, Iran's economy might face yet another blow.
Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Middle East Now. Many thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this show. Do stay with us on I24 News. Benita Levine is up next with The Rundown. Good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
phase in the war between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon intensifies, with the terror group launching more than 100 rockets at northern Israeli communities, hospitals preparing for a possible increase in cases, and Israel reiterating no country would accept rocket fire on its residents. We go live to the scene. As the focus shifts from Israel's war with Hamas to a new war with Hezbollah, relatives of hostages still held captive in Gaza say their loved ones are being abandoned and time is running out. Thousands take to the streets overnight, demanding a hostage ceasefire deal. We bring you the latest updates from Israel's defense headquarters in Tel Aviv. And media coverage of the war is in the spotlight. The IDF raiding the Al Jazeera news offices in Ramallah in the West Bank on Sunday as soldiers gave the Qatari-owned network a military closure order, citing national security concerns. Hamas condemns the move. We speak to a media expert. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine. The new phase in the war across the northern front is well underway. Day 352 of the war, a war started by Hamas on the 7th of October. Major Hezbollah rocket barrages on this day, an early morning wake-up call for residents of northern Israel, hours after the Israeli Home Front Command changed instructions for people in Haifa and those north of the port city. This is footage from the moment rockets hit in Kiryat Bialik and the Jezreel Valley. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu is today vowing that Hezbollah will soon get the message after a series of dramatic Israeli operations in recent days, including the targeted elimination of top Hezbollah commanders, one of whom had been wanted by the US for decades. Ibrahim Akil and top leaders of the Radwan forces were killed in that strike in Beirut, reportedly while planning an invasion of the Galilee, much like the Hamas terror rampage nearly a year ago. This all coming days after scores of Hezbollah operatives were eliminated in those mysterious pager and walkie-talkie blasts in Lebanon over 2 consecutive days. Israel has yet to comment on the coordinated explosions targeting those communication devices. More in this report by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran.
Within hours, 500,000 Israelis found themselves added to Hezbollah's target list. Over 150 rockets, drones, and cruise missiles were launched at northern Israel on Sunday morning, causing damage to numerous communities, many of which have not been targeted so far. The rockets came from Lebanon, while the drones and cruise missiles were launched from Iraq.
Around 6:30, there was an alarm, and then immediately afterwards, a big explosion, very, very big explosion. Even 3 or 4 houses from here, our window in the main room was completely destroyed.
4 people were lightly wounded from shrapnel. The IDF said it struck dozens of Hezbollah targets across southern Lebanon, including rocket launchers and military structures.
This is war, okay? Not present for anybody, I believe in this. But I tell you what, I don't fear about myself. I fear only about our children, our little children, because they didn't do nothing to anybody, you know. Children are innocent.
Hezbollah's launches were their deepest rocket fire into Israel since they unilaterally began attacking Israel on October 8th, forcing nearly 100,000 Israelis to evacuate. As a result of the expanded range, the IDF's Home Front Command tightened its restrictions in northern Israel. Schools were ordered shut in the Golan Heights, Galilee, and Haifa Bay area, as hospitals in the north were instructed to move patients to protected areas.
We are determined to return our residents in the north safely to their homes. No country can tolerate fire on its residents, fire on its cities, and we, the State of Israel, will not tolerate it either. We will do everything necessary to restore security.
Hezbollah said the escalation was its response to last week's pager and walkie-talkie blasts, as well as the targeted elimination of Hezbollah's top commander, Ibrahim Akil, and over a dozen other senior Radwan force commanders, and said that this was only the beginning.
We have entered a new phase. We call it the battle of open reckoning. This includes the support front for Gaza. From time to time, we kill them, and we will continue to fight them in ways which they are aware of and in ways which they are not aware of.
Speaking to Sky News, Israeli President Isaac Herzog said Israel does not want a wider war with Hezbollah, but that it has the obligation to protect its people.
And all of these leaders who were eradicated on Friday by the Israeli attack, all of these leaders were meeting together in order to launch the same horrific, horrendous attack that we had on October 7th by Hamas, by burning Israelis, butchering them, raping their women, abducting and taking hostage old people and young and little babies. This is exactly the same plan that they've been planning for years.
And so, with Israel delivering Hezbollah blow after blow, and the Iranian proxy deepening its range of fire into Israel, the sides are approaching the point of no return.
So for the latest on the ground, let's go live to correspondent Robert Swift. He joins us from northern Israel. And Rob, a new phase in this war, major Hezbollah rocket fire from southern Lebanon towards northern Israel early this morning, including in parts that hadn't been targeted before. What is the latest? What can you tell us?
That's right. There seems to be a slight disconnect between the scale of events that have taken place in the last 24 hours and the feelings here in the street. As you can see behind me, there are still residents of Haifa out at bars, at cafes, eating. That despite the scale of the bombardments that took place early this morning, 4 separate waves of bombardments causing damage in some of the outer areas of Haifa we're reporting to you from now. Since then, we have seen a continuation of Hezbollah attacks this afternoon and into this evening, with them predominantly located in the area around Kiryat Shmona. They're on a lower scale, the kind of attacks that we've become accustomed to seeing over the last 10, 11 months, not at the scale of the bombardments that took place this morning. But in response to them, the IDF and the Home Front Command have stepped up their preparations. We've seen hospitals increasing their defensiveness by moving patients into underground car parks and facilities where treatment can be continued in a secure form. But here in the streets, people seem fairly relaxed.
It certainly does look relaxed when you look at the people sitting behind you having something to drink. But we also know many threats persist right now as we are speaking. And we know Benjamin Netanyahu is reiterating that Israel is determined to return displaced residents in the north safely to their homes. How does he do that realistically, though?
Yeah, that's the ultimate question. I think an important factor here is the U.S. position on this. They've said for a number of weeks or even months that they feel that if Israel was to desire to return residents to the north of Israel, a large-scale war, which would likely ensue if an escalation were to occur, wouldn't return those residents, or certainly not in the immediate future, wouldn't return them. But there's a school of thought that in order to de-escalate the continuous conflict on the northern border, Israel needs to, at least in the short and medium term, escalate the situation. Now, as well as those comments from the Prime Minister, the Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, has said today that the IDF is increasing the cost that Hezbollah is bearing for its continuous attacks against Israel. The question, though, is can Hezbollah sustain those attacks? We've seen over a number of months that Hamas have taken huge blows and yet have not been defeated by it. They continue to elicit attacks. Hezbollah, similarly, are an organisation based on martyrdom, and it's possible that they will take these hits, absorb them, and continue as they have done up to this point. The big question, therefore, is how does Hezbollah respond to the 3 waves of successful attacks that have been attributed to Israel in the last week or so?
The big question indeed. Thank you so much for now. Correspondent Robert Swift, live from northern Israel. More to come from Rob, of course, in the coming hours. And now for more reaction and insight, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and Jewish News Syndicate and host of the podcast The Lapin Assessment on the Patreon site, and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. So many questions remain. There is no doubt this is a new phase in the war. Hezbollah needs to move away from that front. Yaakov, how does that happen?
Well, I think that, what's happening here, if we take a step back from all of the very dramatic tactical developments, is it seems to me that Israel has placed an ultimatum on the table. And that ultimatum says, look, you, Hezbollah, are not going to be able to dictate how Israel is going to operate in Gaza. Hezbollah is saying if you want the northerners to come back, you have to reach some sort of ceasefire in Gaza, and it's operating according to Iranian orders. This is Iran, in my view, activating its chief proxy to try and save what's left of the terror army that Iran helped to build in the Gaza Strip. So all of these arenas are interlinked. And now Israel is coming along. The Israeli cabinet seems to have made a very clear decision that it's not going to accept that linkage, and it's going to tell Hezbollah, listen, you have two choices. You either stop firing on northern Israel, or this is going to end up in a war. This intermediate war of attrition, this phase is now over as far as Israel is concerned, and Hezbollah is going to have to make this decision. And in order to help them make the decision, quote unquote help, we have seen a series of devastating blows, some of which resemble science fiction in terms of capabilities. And I think that this is all part of this very, very major ultimatum that's now on the table.
And so disturbing, Ariel, to hear in your report, in fact, that the Radwan forces eliminated on Friday in that precision strike by Israel in Beirut had been planning another massacre, the likes of the 7th of October, but this time from Hezbollah operatives in the Galilee.
Yeah, look, we didn't need Isaac Herzog to appear on Sky News to know that that is one of the objectives of the Radwan force. And even if what he's saying is true, it wouldn't have been their first and only meeting on that. They have their plans ready, and they would have executed them when they would have decided to. And that illustrates what Israel's threats are, and that Israel's far from removing Hezbollah's rocket launching capabilities, but targeting that isn't the only threat, and it isn't even the most imminent threat, because the question, what allowed Israelis to go down to return to their homes in the Gaza border communities, was the elimination of the ground invasion threat from Hamas. They still fire rockets not only to southern Israel, but also to central Israel at a lower capacity, albeit, but that capability hasn't been removed. And this illustrates that what Israel's trying to do is to first remove its threat from its border at a lower threshold than an all-out war. But I totally agree with Yaakov. Last Tuesday, when Israel pressed the go button to explode the 5,000 pagers, that is when Israel moved from defense to offense to become more proactive. And what this new phase, what we're seeing, is Israel gradually taking out or trying to take out Hezbollah's war capabilities, to minimize its launching capabilities of rockets into Israel without touching the heavy payload missiles that still remain buried deep in northern Lebanon and in the Bekaa Valley, and minimizing the threat of both a ground invasion and the threat to Israeli ground forces if they were to decide, the IDF and the cabinet, to approve a ground invasion. So this switch from defense to offense is also to improve the current security situation on the ground, but also moving forward to try and take away Hezbollah's war capabilities.
Just to be clear, Israel has yet to comment on the walkie-talkie and pager incident, so to speak. But yes, your point is very well taken and understood. Gentlemen, stay with us. There's much more to discuss, but still on this topic, IDF Chief Herzi Halevi broadcasting this message to the Israeli public and specifically residents of the north just a short while ago, saying the IDF is ready for any development, while also outlining some of the recent successful eliminations of Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. Let's take a listen.
We hit the elite Hezbollah forces, the Radwan, its most senior commander, Ibrahim Akil, was eradicated. It's very important, and I know to what degree this shakes the organization. These commanders and terrorists organized for years to conquer the Galilee. Their responsibility for the murder of Israeli civilians and soldiers over the years. They planned how to plan the next massacre, the next terror attack. On Friday afternoon, how they can penetrate Israel, murder civilians, abduct Israeli soldiers. We preempted that through first-class maneuvers, not only of the intelligence, but of the soldiers themselves. The entire chain of command of the Hezbollah received a very clear message. And this has a message that we will be able to hit anyone who hits the citizens of the State of Israel, wherever they may be.
So for more, we now go live to our correspondent, Zach Anders. He joins us from outside Defense Headquarters in Tel Aviv. And as we just heard there, and we've been discussing here in studio, Zach, Herzi Halevi saying just a short while ago, no sovereign country can allow the attacks that Hezbollah has been launching at residents in the north, adding that Israel has not used all its capabilities against the terror group yet. What else did he say? Tell us more.
Yeah, and similar to what Rob was reporting earlier, this is the defense establishment's current focus, is what is taking shape in the north. And going forward, that is the tone that we are getting emanating from top down throughout the Israeli government. We actually just have an update from the Times of Israel, a leak within Netanyahu's administration, that he plans to tell ministers that half the hostages are still alive inside Gaza. And this is coming at the same time, of course, that the headlines are dominated by what is taking shape in the north, and the conversation has been primarily about what the military plan is going forward against Hezbollah. But as you talk to the protesters here and some of the family members that I've been in touch with, the main concern, of course, is that everything surrounding progress on a hostage deal, potential ceasefire, has been put on the side, that no progress has been made in the last several days, especially since the middle of last week, when it became clear that this confrontation with Hezbollah was coming to a complete head-on.
And meanwhile, we are hearing, obviously, there are concerns too that Hezbollah is able to target sites in Tel Aviv and surrounds. We see the protesters there behind you. Talk us through the security efforts, Zach, at major bases and installations, especially after the funeral of Hezbollah commander Ibrahim Akil in recent hours. He was, of course, eliminated in that Israeli strike in Beirut on Friday. Talk to us about the security concerns in Tel Aviv and surrounds.
You know, we don't notice any changes in the kind of security situation around some of these more sensitive installations like the Kyria here. But from what I have been told by Israeli sources is that there is a heightened state of alert, and that air defenses across the country are fielding threats from multiple directions. As Rob mentioned as well, it's not just southern Lebanon. There is cross-border fire coming from Iraq as well, a downed drone from the Iraq direction. And that's the concern here, is that with the last month demonstrating to us that these threats can be fielded from any direction, but not just from any direction, that they can actually reach into central Israel. Less than a week removed from Yemeni ballistic missile landing just short of Tel Aviv here. We still don't know for certain what the intended target was, but we can only wager a few guesses that sites like this, or perhaps with no regard to military installations, perhaps just the center of town, a civilian pinpoint try and hit downtown was the target. And that's really the concern here. And it's fielded primarily, routed primarily through air defenses. We're hearing that reservists that are otherwise trained for these kind of roles are in active duty currently, and that essentially air defenses across the country are fully staffed, that any vacation time coming up that would have otherwise been granted has been denied.
Thank you so much. Live from Tel Aviv, correspondent Zach Anders outside Defense Headquarters. Thank you, Zach. Now, as the focus shifts from Israel's war with Hamas to a new war with Hezbollah, relatives of hostages still held captive in Gaza say their loved ones are being abandoned and time is running out, as Zach was just outlining. Now, thousands took to the streets of Tel Aviv overnight for a weekly protest demanding a hostage release ceasefire deal. Correspondent Nicole Zedek has more in this report.
Anger in the streets of Tel Aviv as thousands come out demanding a hostage release deal and ceasefire with Hamas. All as the main headlines focus on escalations with Hezbollah.
I am incredibly concerned with the increased tension with Hezbollah because my biggest concern is that all the public's attention and the world's attention would be drawn to the north, and eventually the hostages will just be completely left alone without anyone to bring them out and without any sincere public attention or gravity that pushes for the hostage deal and bringing them back home.
As demonstrators are lighting fires in the streets, Israel is sparking flames in Lebanon with a series of intense airstrikes.
The price for this war will be paid by the hostages and all of Israel's citizens. To Netanyahu and his government, we clearly say, you have no mandate to abandon the hostages, even while the cannons rumble in the north. Once again, we repeat our demand, hostage deal first.
But chances of a hostage deal are dwindling, according to a Wall Street Journal report. U.S. officials told the Journal no deal is imminent, and it's unlikely an agreement is reached before the end of President Biden's term. But publicly, the White House says they're still working on said deal.
Nobody's giving up hope. Nobody's going to stop working towards this. As we've said so many times, we believe the best chance at getting the hostages home is through this ceasefire deal. Now, we'd be the first ones to recognize, as I did the other day, that it's hard, it's daunting, and that we are not closer to achieving that than we were even a week or so ago.
While the White House isn't giving up, it's also recognizing how a war in the north complicates months-long efforts for a deal in the south. A deal these protesters say needs to be accepted now to bring the 101 hostages back home.
Still in studio, Yaakov Lappin, I'm going to come straight to you. Heartbreaking to think the families of the hostages saying they're feeling abandoned. One can certainly understand why. Through a military perspective, how does a war in the north impact this elusive deal in Gaza?
Well, one of the reasons I think that Israel is feeling more confident about the north is because it's freeing up more and more forces from a military perspective. We saw the 98th Division, which is a very powerful IDF division, move from Gaza to the northern border, and not it alone has made that shift. A lot of other units have as well. I think that, the question of Gaza and the issue of the hostage, which is obviously heartbreaking, is part of a much bigger strategic question, and that is, what is Israel's big plan for Gaza going forward? And I think the time has come for the Israeli government, the cabinet, to put a plan on the table for the Gaza Strip, whether there's a deal or not a deal. I think, at this stage, a military administration in the Gaza Strip is going to be inevitable. Otherwise, Hamas is going to remain as a political and a terrorist force. And without the ability to take away their hijacking of aid distribution, which is another very important issue, that, those kinds of moves by Israel will only increase the pressure on Yahya Sinwar, only increase the pressure on Hamas, and they're not all military moves. A lot of these are moves that are designed to show the Gazan population that the Hamas political regime is over. It's finished and it's not coming back. Those are the kinds of things that will both promote Israeli security interest and increase the pressure on Yahya Sinwar. But at the end of the day, I think that what's really happening here is that Israel is making a major effort to de-link these two arenas, Lebanon and Gaza, and thereby foil the Iranian plan to pressure Israel into leaving Gaza before Hamas is fully destroyed.
We don't have much time left, Ariel, but you yourself were in Gaza not so long ago, covering developments in Rafah. We know earlier today the army saying it had killed 2 Hamas terrorists who likely murdered 6 Israeli hostages in that tunnel in Gaza at the end of last month. Talk to us about what is going on inside the Gaza Strip right now. What can you tell us?
Right, so I agree with Yaakov and putting the spotlight on the hijacking of the humanitarian aid, because that is not only where Hamas continues to stay afloat, but that's its major source of income right now. It's taking this humanitarian aid, selling it to the population of Gaza, and that way also making a buck and also solidifying its rule for the next days. And so in order to prevent it from continuing to be the sole responsibility for the people of Gaza, Israel needs to also target this and prevent any other way for it to regroup and to gather its strength. So far, and again, I totally agree with Yaakov, no plan has been brought forth to prove that. I will just note that we heard John Kirby, the national security spokesperson. He said just a short while ago on Fox News that Yahya Sinwar, Hamas leader, remains the big obstacle preventing a deal.
The big obstacle preventing a deal, and as we speak, 101 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza. Still no clarity as to how many of those hostages are alive. Ariel Osaran, Yaakov Lappin, stay with us. We've got much more to discuss right now, though. A very quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues on the rundown. Media coverage of the war is in the spotlight. The IDF raiding the Al Jazeera news offices in Ramallah in the West Bank on Sunday. We speak to a media expert. Stay tuned. The rundown is back in just 2 minutes.
Sail for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayasad.fr.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the rundown. So how is the US responding to the latest developments across the northern front? Israel eliminating several top Hezbollah commanders in its precision strike on a building in Beirut on Friday, as members of the elite Radwan forces met to discuss an invasion of the Galilee, much like the Hamas terror onslaught on the 7th of October. Ibrahim Aqil had been wanted by the US for decades for his role in the bombing of the US Embassy and Marine Barracks in the Lebanese capital some 40 years ago. Jake Sullivan saying on Saturday, anytime a terrorist who has murdered Americans is brought to justice, we believe that is a good outcome. So for more insight, it's a pleasure to welcome Ron Campius, Washington Bureau Chief at the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, joining us from Arlington, Virginia. Thank you so much for your time. There is much on the go. Interested to hear your perspective, because the current phase of the war is unfolding across the northern front, and American officials say the Biden administration is extremely concerned about the risk of an all-out war. What do you make of the response out of the US to these latest developments? Some are suggesting it's relatively muted or restrained so far.
Yeah, I think yesterday John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council, said they don't want an escalation, and he used the word they don't want a second war. So it's like they see this not even just as an expansion of the current war, but as a second war, and it's not something they need right before a presidential election. They don't want to see. They don't want an administration that's just can't control events in the Middle East. On the other hand, I think what you quoted Jake Sullivan is saying is also very relevant. And then what one of your panelists was quoting Kirby is saying regarding Sinwar, they don't see Israel as initiating these escalations. They see going back at least to what happened in Majd al-Shams and the murder or the killing of 12 children playing in a playground there. They see Hezbollah as initiating this. They don't. Their approach to the war in the north is that Hezbollah didn't have to enter this war on October the 8th, but they want to make sure it doesn't expand. They're hoping that all sides will. I mean, I think they know that all sides have an interest in the war not expanding, but sometimes events can get out of the control of the best intentions of anybody.
And of course, the funeral for Hezbollah's top military commander, Ibrahim Aqil, taking place in recent hours. He was killed in that Israeli airstrike in Beirut on Friday, along with at least 15 other senior commanders, including those in charge of the Radwan forces. Aqil, of course, had been wanted by the US for 4 decades, so successful eliminations in Lebanon have clear benefits for the US as well right now.
Yeah, I think this is, what happened with Aqil reinforces, I think, the message that Prime Minister Netanyahu and other Israelis have put out there, that that they're trying to persuade the West that this isn't just a war for Israel. This is a war for. Sometimes they get a little bit they go for it and they say this is a war for Western civilization, but it certainly is a war. They believe it's a war defending Western interests. And absolutely, the death of Aqil, the killing of Aqil, reinforces that for me.
And it seems we have unfortunately lost that connection to Virginia Arlington, and now it is back again. Please continue.
Okay, I'm just going to turn around because I think I'll get better reception. But yes, I think that what I was saying was that this reinforces the message that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to get out, that this war is not simply in Israel's interests, it's in the interests of the West. And certainly when the primary victim in the attack was a man who carried out one of the worst attacks on Americans abroad in U.S. history, if not the worst attack, in Lebanon in 1984, that can't help but resonate for the American administration, however much it wants to tamp things down.
And you made mention of the fact that Yahya Sinwar remains the biggest obstacle to getting a deal. Your sense right now of the likelihood of a breakthrough, of course, when we're talking about a hostage ceasefire deal in Gaza, and perhaps behind the scenes, the pressure the U.S. could be exerting right now for that to, in fact, still happen. Your thoughts?
I think that I don't know if the Americans are as invested as they are in I mean, certainly if there was an opening towards a hostage deal, I think they would leap on it and they would sort of begin pressuring the sides to get to one. But I think that what Sullivan said represents an outlook in the American government that it's just not in hand right now, and that the principal party to blame is Hamas, and specifically Sinwar.
We certainly will wait to see how it all unfolds. Of course, Donald Trump saying he's met with the Prime Minister of Qatar in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. We wait to see confirmation and what exactly would come out of meetings like that. But for now, we need to leave it there. Ron Campias, thank you so much. Live from Virginia, Arlington. Always appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, still in studio, Yaakov Lapin and Ariel Osran. And Yaakov, I want to come back to you about the next moves up north. Is it likely that a military operation, a ground operation, is imminent?
Well, look, I think that every day that Hezbollah continues to fire on northern Israel, and I think it doesn't really matter where they fire. It's the point is that they're continuing to fire. And the Israeli ultimatum, as I read it, is you have to stop firing completely. So every day that this doesn't happen raises the chance that we're going to end up in that kind of operation. And I don't know how much time is left. I don't know what the stop clock is. I'm sure there is a stop clock. It's known to the cabinet. It's known to the general staff in the IDF. It's not known to the general public, and it's not known to Hezbollah. But what Hezbollah does know is that every day that passes, as we've been discussing here, it is losing more and more capabilities. Thousands of rocket launchers, the Radwan elite unit, sector commanders, the whole chain of command, communications, they are being hit with one hammer blow after the other. And I think all of this is intended to help them, quote unquote, make the decision that Israel wants them to make, which is to stop firing. If they don't do that, and this is a decision they're going to have to make together with the Iranians, then I think we will end up seeing not only a ground offensive, but a major air offensive, the likes of which possibly the Middle East hasn't seen in terms of the intensity of firepower involved.
Ariel, very briefly, you're nodding.
Yeah, I'm nodding because as Israel continues to take away Hezbollah's war capabilities, eventually Hezbollah will have to decide whether to continue at this pace where it loses capabilities as if it were in a full-out war, but it's not, causing Israel that damage that would make it cost-effective on their part. And the closer they reach that point, then will come that point of decision, as Yaakov describes, for Hezbollah and the Iranians to decide either we're going to go all in because we're losing more and more capabilities, and at some point it's going to cost too much to just continue to let this happen, or they will it will help them, as Yaakov said, move to a diplomatic agreement. So time right now is on the side of Israel, in my opinion, in this current strategy. But this reality only began on Tuesday, and so it's very interesting to see where this fast-paced change of the dynamic of the momentum, if you want to call it, give it a sports analogy, the momentum has shifted to the other team. Now it's on the Israeli side in its fight against Hezbollah, and the clock is running out for them to decide whether to keep on taking these blows or to go out in a wider war.
Stay with us. We're going to blow the whistle, so to speak, on this discussion for now, but we will come back to it because we turn our attention now to media coverage of the war. It's in the spotlight as the IDF raided the Al Jazeera news offices in Ramallah in the West Bank on Sunday, as soldiers gave the network a military closure order for 45 days. The Hamas terror group condemning the move as Israel continues to crack down on the Qatar-funded broadcaster, citing national security threats. Our Emma Siegel has the details.
In the early hours of Sunday morning, the IDF raided news network Al Jazeera in the West Bank city of Ramallah on live TV. The bureau was ordered closed for 45 days. Al Jazeera has denounced the move.
This is a blatant attack on the Al Jazeera channel and Al Jazeera network and those who are working with them, as well as on the freedom of speech and the task of delivering the truth. This is an attack that aims to obscure the truth.
The Qatar-funded broadcaster has increasingly come under Israel's scrutiny for its coverage amid the Israel-Hamas war, as well as the alleged links between Al Jazeera members and terror organizations operating in the Gaza Strip. The latest shuttering of Al Jazeera's office follows an order issued in May that saw Israeli police raid its East Jerusalem and Nazareth bureaus, seizing equipment, stopping its broadcasts, and blocking its websites in Israel.
Stop working, and nobody can go inside the office. This is a situation. It means that they extended the closure, the closure of our office, the shutdown of our office in Jerusalem, and banning our working inside Israel to the West Bank. They extended to the West Bank now, which means that Al Jazeera cannot work inside Israel and inside the West Bank.
Israeli Minister of Communications Shlomo Kari confirmed the raid, calling Al Jazeera, quote, the mouthpiece of Hamas and Hezbollah, saying Israel will continue to fight the enemy channels. In April, Israel's government passed an emergency law allowing the country to ban Al Jazeera for a 45-day period with further 45-day renewals subject to court approval. The ban has now been renewed 4 times since then. As the broadcaster continues to operate from neighboring Jordan, it is unclear how long it will be banned from broadcasting within Israel or the West Bank.
And now for more, we welcome for reaction and insight Gil Hoffman, Executive Director at Honest Reporting and the former Chief Political Correspondent at the Jerusalem Post. He joins us now from Jerusalem. Gil, thank you so much for your time. An important story, a controversial story. This isn't the first time, of course, the IDF has targeted the Al Jazeera news offices. Last time was in Jerusalem in May, now in Ramallah. In both cases saying national security was at risk. Your take, is this the right move right now?
Well, Israel has freedom of speech, Benita, that we're very proud of, but there's not freedom to incite to terror. And as the report said accurately, Al Jazeera has been part of Hamas throughout this war. There were journalists from Al Jazeera who were Hamas commanders. They mistreated a mother of a hostage who they put on TV together with a Hamas commander and made her try to debate him. You've had this Al Jazeera has been banned in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, in Bahrain. And so it's not as controversial as they're making it seem around the world. It's perfectly understandable that temporarily during a war, this organization that has been helping Hamas so intensively would not be permitted to continue to do so.
But is it clear abroad that that is the connection? As you say, the Israeli Communication Minister Shlomo Kari saying Al Jazeera is the mouthpiece of Hamas and Hezbollah. You're outlining some of the examples. But that doesn't seem to be the way many abroad look at it. They would argue it's not a very good look in terms of the freedom of the media.
You're right. It definitely doesn't look good around the world, that they don't understand that Al Jazeera has been banned in countries around the world. They don't understand that the danger that Al Jazeera poses. They're viewed by 450 million people. I wish that on I-24. Okay? And when they're broadcasting false charges that the IDF soldiers went to Shifa Hospital and raped women, something that a former Al Jazeera official then later had to apologize for, then that causes even more damage around the world. And that's something that those who want Israel to look good around the world need to understand, that you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, and that Israel made a controversial decision that in the long run was better than the alternative.
Certainly that misinformation as well is so dangerous at times like this. What do you make, though, of those criticizing the fact that the raid happened this morning in Ramallah in the West Bank? It raises some tricky questions in terms of location.
Absolutely, it does. Ramallah is very much part of the Palestinian Authority. This was definitely a controversial move. Al Jazeera has been banned in Israel, not banned by the Palestinian Authority. But yes, there's a war going on. And just like Israel has been going into Palestinian territories in order to take action against terror, it did this step as well. It's surprising. It's bold, and the IDF deemed it necessary. It's not a political decision. It's a military one, and it's something that the world needs to understand.
Hamas, of course, condemning the move. Of course, when a terror organization behind a massacre and mass abduction is upset, one has to ask a lot of questions. But this closure order is for 45 days. So what happens then?
They're back operating like they did before. Their office in Jerusalem, both in their East Jerusalem office and in their Malcha Technological Park West Jerusalem office, right by the government press office that banned them, will continue working again. This is a temporary move that they've made. And let's not forget, the Palestinian Authority, they're not upset about this, because the Palestinian Authority has been targeted by Al Jazeera for many, many years. They had this whole expose that tried to bring down the Palestinian Authority several years ago. The Al Jazeera helps Hamas. And just like Hamas wants to end Israel, Hamas wants to end the Palestinian Authority. Hamas and Al Jazeera go hand in hand. And so this does not help the Palestinians, that Al Jazeera is still so powerful around the world. And that's something else that I wish people understood better.
And Gil, you alluded to it a little earlier. More broadly speaking, there's this blurring of lines, rather a disturbing one when it comes to reporters. Still questions remaining around reporters who somehow managed to be at those breach security fences on the 7th of October as the Hamas terror rampage started. Startling indeed, not to mention questions around Israeli hostages being held in the home of a reporter. Much to investigate. How does an organization like yours deal with this 1 year into this war and no end in sight?
So on November 8th, Honest Reporting started asking questions about how the photographers in particular got to be at the site of the kidnappings, infiltrating into Israel so early, questioned whether they were tipped off by Hamas. And then slowly but surely, we found out about one journalist who was kissed by Yahya Sinwar in a picture, another one who received an award from Hamas that we revealed today, who on October 7th was there in Sderot, broadcasting on Instagram Live, telling people they've got to come in and be involved in kidnapping the men, doing what they want to do with the women, and killing the dogs. And we're continuing to expose at honestreporting.com every day different incidents like this of journalists who have crossed lines and helped the terrorists who are working for top mainstream media outlets around the world, be it the New York Times, AP, Reuters, CNN. 12 journalists have been fired over the last 2 years who've been supporters of Hamas very openly or praised Hitler. And we're going to continue to be that media watchdog and not let them get away with it.
We certainly will be watching to see the outcome of all those investigations you've just outlined there. Gil Hoffman, the Executive Director at Honest Reporting, live from Jerusalem. Thank you so much for being with us on The Rundown.
Sure.
And I'm going to come straight again to Yaakov Lapin. There's a war, a military war, and there's a media war. And the blurring of lines is so upsetting.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Al Jazeera is a vicious propaganda outlet for Qatar, and not only does it incite against Israel, but also against moderate Sunni countries, which is why most of those countries have banned it as well. But really, I think, what's amazing to me is that those who are outraged in the West by this action have nothing at all to say about the fact that the European Council banned 4 Russian Kremlin stations. The U.S. has got sanctions on RT. That's not a problem. But when Israel protects its security, suddenly there's a crackdown on freedom.
Certainly raises a lot of questions. Your thoughts, Ariel? You've been in the field throughout this war. Your takeaways?
I've been in the field, but I haven't seen Al Jazeera there. Look, at the end of the day, when you watch Al Jazeera, there's Al Jazeera in Arabic and Al Jazeera in English. Al Jazeera in English speaks a language of human rights, of really everything that we've talked about today, of decolonialism and all those. But Al Jazeera in Arabic takes a completely different tone. They call Hamas terrorists martyrs. They call the terror organizations, the resistance. In English, they won't call them the resistance. They'll say Hamas, they'll say Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In Arabic, they call them the resistance. In Arabic, they are the mouthpiece. In English, they serve their strategic goals. But in Arabic, they are their mouthpiece. And those who are outraged simply don't watch Al Jazeera in Arabic, so they don't know that this is what's going on the screen. But all those countries who have banned Al Jazeera have banned Al Jazeera in Arabic because of this activity and this duality, this duplicity, talking in two voices, both with the same goal of attacking Israel, one from the angle of human rights, the other from the angle of supporting terror. This is something that Israel cannot allow, especially when it's at war with these elements.
And I don't have much time left, but Yaakov, it's one part of the coverage that just keeps on raising so many flags. How reporters managed to get to the scene that breached fence on the 7th of October when Israeli security forces were nowhere near. That's got to beg a lot of questions a year into this war.
Yeah, I mean, Gil Huffman addressed a lot of those questions. It was, a terrible sight to see so many, photographers there taking those pictures. And then, I think one of them even won some kind of international competition, which was just horrific. At the end of the day, it was actually a side note. Because the horrors of that day were so much worse than anything that was going on in terms of documenting them. But we still have a lot of unanswered questions. At the end of the day, I think that Israel is clearly the only country in the Middle East that actually has freedom of press. And it has every right, in my opinion, to ban Al Jazeera, at least the same right that the European Council has to ban Russian state media and the U.S. to place sanctions on Russian state media. I really don't see a difference in between any of those actions. And so anybody who's against one of those should really explain why they're silent about the others.
The spotlight on media freedom continues. Yaakov Lapin, Ariel Osaran, appreciate you both being here in studio. Thank you as always. Now, we move back to one of our top stories, talking of those mysterious pager explosions in Lebanon several days back. One of those killed was Hussein Gandour, known by some as the Butcher of Madaya. He was a commander of Hezbollah's elite Radwan forces, fighting alongside Syrian regime forces in Syria's civil war. He was infamous there for his part in backing Assad forces and weaponizing hunger against rebel-held areas. Our Alex Schloss reports.
Hussein Ali Gandour, known by some as the Butcher of Madaya, was killed in a series of pager explosions in Lebanon, an attack attributed to, but not acknowledged by Israeli intelligence services. Gandour earned his moniker during the Syrian civil war, when Hezbollah intervened on behalf of the Syrian government. Hezbollah, along with the Syrian army, laid siege to the city of Madaya amid a push to re-establish control of the Assad regime over the Syrian-Lebanese border region. Dozens died of starvation during the year-long siege, and then UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon decried the situation in Madaya, warning against the use of starvation as a weapon of war.
Well, the situation in Madaya and other besieged areas are absolutely horrific. Like you see the photos of kids and mothers and adults who are absolutely like starving to death. They are like on the edge of death because of the lack of food and medications. I spoke to a father of 5 kids in Madaya, and he said, like, we don't have any food. And they said, look, I heard you are eating grass. He said, yes, that was in the past, a few days ago. We don't have a grass anymore because of the snow, the grass gone. And I said, like, what are you eating? He said, literally, we boil water and we add some black peppers, salt, and some spices to make a meal for our kids. We don't have anything.
In April 2017, an Iran-Qatar brokered ceasefire was reached, and 10,000 people of the estimated 40,000 total population of the wider area were evacuated. Gandour joins the ranks of other senior Hezbollah operatives who honed their battlefield tactics in Syria and earned their place in the group's elite Radwan forces.
And in Iran itself, a search is underway after an explosion at a coal mine overnight. Dozens of people have been killed and scores are still trapped under the rubble. More in this report.
Another race against time for Iran as it tries to save workers trapped inside a coal mine following an explosion. According to state media, the explosion killed at least 51, but local authorities claim there were 69 people in the mine at the time of the blast. The blast occurred in the South Khorasan province in the eastern part of the country around 9 p.m. local time, reportedly caused by a methane gas explosion. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian shared his condolences for the victims.
I expressed my condolences to the families of these loved ones. I spoke with the ministers of health, country and industry. We are following this issue with all our efforts. The conversation I had with the Minister of Industry is that this incident should be a lesson that from now on, in the minds of our country, there should be a system that this kind of accident would not happen. I imagine we can prevent this.
The Tabas mine is considered the richest and largest coal area in Iran, covering over 30,000 square kilometers, according to state media, and provides for 76% of the country's coal. With an incident like this, Iran's economy might face yet another blow.
And that's a wrap for the Rundown for today. Back again tomorrow, same time, same place. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.
Introducing the brand new I24 News Video on Demand app.
You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary.
Whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News Video on Demand app today.